My name is Sue. Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to read you a story called On the Road to the Cross. When it's really noisy, do you try to find a quiet corner to hide in? When it's really quiet, do you try to find someone to talk to? Parts of today's story are really noisy and other parts are really quiet. And before we open the book and find out why, let's do our wrap. Let's open the book. Let's take a look. Let's listen and see how good God can be. Oh, let's take a look. Let's open the book. Let's open the book. Let's take a look. Let's listen and see how good God can be. Oh, let's take a look. Let's open the book. Today's story is called On the Road to the Cross. Sometimes it was quiet, and sometimes it was noisy. Sometimes there was shouting, and sometimes there was silence. And sometimes there was a strange mixture of noise and quiet on that never-to-be-forgotten Friday. It was early in the morning, and Jesus was standing quietly in front of the noisy crowd. The religious leaders had taken him to Pilate, the Roman governor. They didn't like the things that Jesus was saying, so they had him arrested and put on trial. They wanted to have him executed, but because the Romans ruled the country, Pilate had to make the final decision. The crowd had gathered to see what would happen. What would Pilate decide? Was Jesus going to live, or was he going to die? Pilate asked Jesus lots of questions, but Jesus didn't answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus calmly replied, "That is what you say." Pilate asked more questions, but Jesus just stood silently with his head bowed. Irritated that all his questions were not being answered, Pilate turned to the noisy crowd and shouted, "I have two prisoners here, Barabbas, a violent criminal, and Jesus, whom some of you think is the promised king." The crowd went silent and listened carefully to what Pilate was saying. "Today," he continued, "I can set one of them free. You choose. Which one shall it be? Jesus or Barabbas?" "Barabbas!" the religious leaders whispered to the crowd. "Barabbas!" shouted the crowd to Pilate. "Free Barabbas!" the religious leaders whispered to the crowd. "Free Barabbas!" the crowd shouted again. "And Jesus?" Pilate asked them. "What shall I do with him?" "Crucify him," the religious leaders whispered to the crowd. "Crucify him!" the crowd shouted back to Pilate. "Why?" asked Pilate. "What has he done?" But the crowd wasn't listening. They just shouted all the more, "Crucify him!" So Pilate handed Jesus over to his soldiers. They dressed him up as a king, made fun of him, and put a crown of thorns on his head. When the soldiers had finished, they put a heavy wooden beam across his shoulders and led him away to be crucified. The streets of Jerusalem were noisy. They were full of hustle and bustle, and there were people everywhere. The heavy beam, part of his cross, weighed Jesus down as he staggered through the crowds. So the soldiers grabbed a man named Simon, an African visitor to the city, and made him carry the beam. Jesus followed silently as they struggled through the noisy crowds. Soon they came to Golgotha, the place where criminals and rebels were executed. As the soldiers fixed Jesus to the cross, there was a lot of noise and people calling out and shouting at him as they passed by. "Save yourself if you can!" Some of the religious leaders stood by and mocked him. "Come down from the cross and then we'll believe in you." But Jesus didn't reply. He just hung there silently. At midday, the sky went dark and all the shouting and noise stopped. Everyone was really quiet. No one understood what was happening. Then at 3 o'clock, on that never-to-be-forgotten Friday, Jesus himself called out twice, each time a prayer to God his Father. And then he died. The Roman centurion in charge of the soldiers was amazed at what he had seen and exclaimed, "This man really was the Son of God." Later that day, in the quiet of the early evening, Joseph, one of the religious leaders who did believe in Jesus, slowly and carefully took his body down from the cross, released him from the beam, and laid him in a tomb in a garden far away from the noisy streets of Jerusalem. And there it remained silently all through the next day. That was a really sad story, wasn't it? But God didn't let it end like that. Next week, we will hear about the wonderful plan God had to bring Jesus back to life. Close your eyes for a moment and think how calm and brave Jesus was, even when everyone was being mean and shouting at him. Think of a time when you have needed to be brave and calm, even if you felt like getting angry and upset. Now I'm going to say a prayer, and if you want to make it your prayer, say Amen at the end after me. Dear God, thank you that we can ask you for calmness when we might want to get angry and fight back. Amen. And that's all for me for this week. Bye-bye.